So the Brexiteering, Sun newspaper, scum, Murdoch scum, two of the fiercest kind of promoters of Boris Johnson and the Brexiteering, fantasy and lies, has got absolutely nothing about Brexit until page 12, I think. And in there, and this two of the editorials so-called, the second editorial say of the scum is headed "Exit Mr. Brexit." Now, you could not make that up. It would have been impossible to even imagine, hypothesize that there could be a headline like this about none other than Dominic Cummings, whom the scum is calling Mr. Brexit. And then it continues to praise him about the various Brexit linked. The point is that the scum is running the front page, main splash, on the robbery of a kind of celebs, £100,000 motorbike or whatever it is. I mean, that is the most important story on the front page of the still very popular among the gullibles paper, which still claims to be owning the political agenda of the day. And it is a remorselessly corrupt role that the scum has been playing for decades in corrupting the society and lying to society and inciting racism and hatred, intolerance of the migrants, and the defiance of the obligations that the UK has been under as part of the status of the UK as a signed up member of thousands of treaties. It's not 4, 5, 6. It's literally thousands of treaties, because the website, there is a website run by the government which has got the claim that there are thousands of treaties that the UK is signed up to. So there is no mention of any of the treaties, any of the obligations. And we are not talking, when we are talking about the thousands of treaties and charters and conventions and declarations, we are not talking about the European Union. We are talking about the charters, declarations, etc., that the UK had been signing for decades before the creation of the EU. And those majority of the charters and declarations and treaties would remain in place even after the whatever the kind of Brexit quote conclusion, they will be there. So those are very important part of the constitutional structure of the UK, that is the legal structure of the UK. And yet in the legal system, there is the mention of the treaties, nor is there any mention in the agenda of the UK Parliament, which is the main House of Commons. There is no reference to the treaties, because the condition, the constitutional condition that is created by the UK signing those treaties that are actually about the contents and the direction and the orientation and the character of domestic legislation, because it's about rights, about kind of entitlements, and about the people inside the UK who are otherwise, that is to say, if divorced from the treaty obligations and requirements, then the UK internal legislation and the UK internal kind of administrative kind of culture, orientation, and focus are devoid of the concept of rights for the many. That is to say, the majority of the people in Britain are denied rights and they seem to have no rights at all. The only kind of rights that are recognized for the citizen, though ordinarily called citizen, because citizenship itself is a kind of illegal kind of concept that is in place confusingly because of the UK's failure or refusal to implement the requirements of the citizenship and human rights kind of treaties that it is signed up to. So the citizens are not normally entitled to basic rights that are called universal rights, what the phrase we use, and we don't use it in relation to any particular treaty. We use this as the universal kind of concepts that we recognize have existed for hundreds of years, thousands of years in essential kind of discourse about rights. And the struggle has been domestically in most of the countries about the concept of rights and whether to give the ordinary people, the citizens, that is ordinary residents and people, in the case of the UK, the indigenous kind of majority, the gullibles, whether to give them the rights or not. That is not to say that the gullibles and the indigenous people, all of them or the majority of them, are innocent. When it comes to the latent hatred and racism and prejudice and denial of rights of the people who they perceive, the gullibles perceive, the indigenous ones perceive to be, quote, foreign or Asian or African, those kind of prejudices and hostilities have not been addressed and eradicated, despite the fact that there have been constitutional means as a result of the UK's signing up to these various treaties and civilizing kind of instruments, the legal instrument, that is the constitutional instruments. So we have been exclusively discussing this at length. It is not discussed, it's not even recognized even by the BBC's press review or the Sky's press preview or the ITV's kind of look counter in the Good Morning Britain slot or any other slot, or on the Sunday version of the news, BBC News channel, they've got a morning thing, two kind of separate looks at the Sunday's papers, Fleet Street papers by the BBC. One is at the start of the Andrew Marr show, and the other follows within the following hour, not an hour later, but within the hour, on the BBC News channel. And the format is that they will take a look at the front pages or the rest of the paper if they have access to the papers, and they would try to tell the viewers the meaning of words, as if the viewers would not understand the headlines. Now that is pathetic, and that is intentionally stupid and stupefying and corrupt and covering up. For example, we are going to discuss the role of the papers, the Fleet Street papers, in the last few days, and especially today, Saturday, the 14th of November 2020, in view of the fact that they are running all these splashes, not the sun, but the majority of them are running big kind of copy, if you like, or long stories, long items about Dominic Cummings leaving the administration of Boris Johnson. And we are asserting, nobody else is saying that, let alone hinting at that. We are asserting, nobody meaning including the people who are still against the Brexiteers, that is, the people who still claim to be for the UK to continue to be remain a member of the European Union. Even they are not saying it, as far as we have seen so far. So this Kudila campaign assertion is this, that the reason why all these papers and all the Fleet Street papers, that is, and the media are going so kind of hectic about Dominic Cummings leaving Boris Johnson administration at number 10 Downing Street is not what the papers are saying. That is to say, it's a kind of last stand by Boris Johnson because he was fed up with Dominic Cummings briefing against Boris Johnson's fiancée or the girlfriend, Kerry Simmons. It's not about that. And it is not about Allegra Stratton kind of asserting the feminist kind of agenda. And it's not about Murira Mirza. They are all being used, and they think that they have succeeded in getting rid of Dominic Cummings, but it's not anything to do with those three or the excuse or the pretext. They have been, the papers have been fed, and the papers and the broadcasting counterparts are kind of copying and repeating and peddling. It is to do with the fact that a man called Joe Biden has made a very brief statement. It's, the reference to the peace process didn't contain even 20 words. But that is what has defined the sudden dramatic about turns in number 10 Downing Street. And Mr. Brexit, exit Mr. Brexit. Unthinkable otherwise. Because the special relationship at, as Philip Stevens has said in the Financial Times on Friday, is more needed by the British than the Americans. And if the Americans say no to the kind of fiddling with the peace process because of Brexit, then Brexit is doomed. And Brexit would be kind of stalled and halted and in fact diffused if the peace process is, or the Good Friday Agreement, is tampered with by Boris Johnson. Remember the short few seconds of historic kind of interrogation by Ed Miliband of Boris Johnson, in which Ed Miliband asserted that Johnson didn't know what was going on in Northern Ireland. He was clueless. And for one moment, Ed Miliband assumed the position of the Prime Minister. And he said, go and answer. I give way, that kind of thing. That was absolutely historic, and that was absolutely spot on. That is why those few seconds of intervention by Ed Miliband became instant hit with people who observed this in context. So this has been now reinforced by Joe Biden, saying that the peace process must continue and the Good Friday Agreement must stand. Although other people have said it. Other people, including members of the Conservative Party, who supported the UK's stay in the EU, they have used that Good Friday Agreement as an example of the things that would be lost by Brexit. So although Boris Johnson got in, by claiming to be delivering Brexit. And the Sun today is defiant, saying that despite Cummings and Kane going, Brexit would be proceeded with. Well, you are hearing this from this Khudilar campaign diagnosing the Fleet Street media. It will not be proceeded with. This is the prediction we make contextually, of course, assuming that all the kind of parameters remain the same. That is to say that Joe Biden enters the kind of White House in time and is not diverted, and that other things remain the same. In that case, the Brexit is finished, because the biggest obstruction to Brexit being implemented has been the operation of the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process. And that is because the other side of Ireland, the bigger Ireland, is an active member of the European Union. And there is a tension that is unbelievably explosive tension between the two in constitutional law terms. And any tampering with the Northern Ireland situation, because internally Northern Ireland is riven by explosive hatred between those who want to join Ireland and those who want to remain part of the UK. So if the UK wants to give up Ireland, then it is not gaining anything. It is losing, literally losing too many things. So Brexit is a stranglehold that has been created by the conservative morons and has been allowed to kind of fester for 4 years by the non-existent Labour Party opposition in Parliament. And so therefore what we are looking at in today's papers is the kind of typical Fleet Street lying to suit Boris Johnson and to save his skin, because they can't admit that Boris Johnson is wrong. All these papers are conservative supporters. When it comes to the election of 12th of December 2019, it was even the Guardian supported the Conservatives, because the Guardian failed to support the Labour Party. And so therefore, all the papers are trying to save Boris Johnson's political career and skin by overhyping the departure of Dominic Cummings and all the internal kind of briefings and counter briefings, etc., etc. This is not the reason why Cummings has gone, or this is not the reason why Johnson felt confident to tell, according to reports, tell Cummings to leave immediately. It is the unparalleled kind of pressure that Boris Johnson already is feeling coming from the US new administration that has impelled him and compelled him to sack the unsackable. So the Times is doing the same kind of lying line, which is that Cummings forced out in purge of Brexiteers. But that is half the admission, purge of Brexiteers. Can you imagine that Boris Johnson would purge Brexiteers? That is the part of the fact, but it is not the full fact. Because they are repeating the same line as the rest of them, saying that Johnson told Cummings to leave immediately because Cummings had been briefing journalists against Carrie Simmons, the pregnant or the kind of just given birth, the Carrie Simmons just given birth to their first child, Carrie Simmons. And that is the kind of lie that the Times is kind of running. It's saying that it's because of the Carrie Simmons row on the briefing. that has been added to the actual kind of stage or staging of the thing. And the staging of the thing has been forced by the change in the USA presidency. Okay, we'll come to that in the next few minutes. This is a piece on the page 2 of the Times where it says that the Labour Party is now being controlled by Keir Starmer because the momentum has fallen short. Let's see what it says. And it falls short on the National Executive Committee, which momentum the Corbyn supporters failed to take control of. And we shall go back to that in a second. And they've got a picture of Cummings outside number 10 on the main road, apparently looking for some kind of transport to arrive, with his box on the pavement. And they're saying that Sajid Javid is due to be restored to a position in the government, whatever position that is. So what they're saying is on pages, 2 pages they're saying it, the Times, well, 2-page spread, which is pages 6 and 7. And the headline, main headline across the 2 pages is "Get Out, Johnson told Brexit squatters in Downing Street." Remember that squatters, this is a very kind of contemptuous word. It was used by Nick Clegg and David Cameron in 2010. In May 2010, after Gordon Brown failed to get the majority at the May 2010 election. And Nick Clegg had already sold his soul and sold the Lib Dems to the Conservatives in return for a post for Nick Clegg himself in the cabinet, which is what he got as Deputy Prime Minister. And in order to amuse and entertain and to kind of convince the Conservatives that Nick Clegg was very hateful of Gordon Brown, he used the word squatter about Gordon Brown. Well, the Gordon Brown crisis was only maybe an extra day or 2 longer than it would have been, and he would have left. But Gordon Brown was trying to get a kind of coalition going, but it was not going well because Nick Clegg was bent on not having a coalition with the Labour Party in May 2010. So Clegg was taunting Gordon Brown with the word squatter and was taunting him by saying that he was not leaving. The squatter should leave the 10 Downing Street. So here is the squatter or squatters. The concept is the same that Johnson has used against Cummings and Kane. And it shows the same kind of contempt. And it is a public kind of instantaneously kind of copied by the media, the mainstream media, the Fleet Street. Shows that the briefing has been intentionally released brazen in order to make it as public as possible so that people across the Atlantic can see it. That Johnson has suddenly realized that Brexit cannot be done. It's undone. And that should be giving the preliminary kind of confidence in the Joe Biden administration about the British regime. because Biden is of Irish ancestry himself, and he has already been celebrated by the Irish as one of their own. So therefore, it is not just an administrative bureaucratic thing. It's a very emotional thing as well for the newly elected American president. Any evidence that Boris Johnson is trying to neglect Ireland or reimpose kind of tension and internal war and civil war in Ireland will mightily displease the American administration fronted by Joe Biden. And that's the actual reason why Johnson wants the whole world to know how openly he has insulted Cummings, the man, Mr. Brexit, as thus Cum itself says. And it says, get out, comma, Johnson told Brexit squatters in Downing Street. And it goes on. So that is the kind of line that they are running, hiding the actual truth, covering up. And there is a piece in the Times, which is also in other papers, saying that the BBC has found a letter apparently written by Diana, which was not found, which had gone missing. And they found it just in time when Martin Bashir is being kind of reportedly leaving his home. And the question is that letter that was reportedly missing a forgery as well? Because maybe the previous forgers are not being used, by some other forgers maybe being used. If they can forge a bank statement or statements, they can forge a letter as well. Because the letter apparently says that Diana wrote that letter after the interview that she gave to Martin Bashir. And in that letter, she said that she was not manipulated into agreeing to that interview. Well, that would be crucial, because that would save Martin Bashir in terms of the allegations that Diana's brother, Charles Spencer, has been making against him. That Bashir got someone in the BBC, the BBC's graphics person, to forge bank statements, which for whatever reason he had to show to Charles Spencer, who then was convinced by the forged document, which he didn't know were forged at the time, and on which basis Charles Spencer, convinced his sister, Diana, to agree to be interviewed by Martin Bashir. So the question is, why did this letter vanish for any length of time, and why has it been found again? And they are saying that it has been found among the possessions of Martin Bashir's, which are being moved from the place wherever he was, which shows that Martin Bashir is moving. The last 2 weeks, reports have been saying that Martin Bashir has been seriously unwell with COVID-19, the virus. And this line has been stopped when Bashir was photographed doing shopping for something, grocery or drinks or whatever, off license. And that line stopped. So there is a kind of continuous updating of the lies that the BBC is issuing about this. Now, there is this kind of smiling image of Allegra Stratton, And apart from Johnson's girlfriend or fiancée, Carrie Simmons, the only person who is actually benefiting from this highly publicly staged departure of Dominic Cummings is, of course, Allegra Stratton. Now, Stratton, since she was announced to be Johnson's television kind of media face in the style of the American president, she has been reported as having been a believer in controlling the birth rates of the poor people and denying the poor people benefits. And she also is reportedly a believer in population control and eugenics. Population control and eugenics, which is a fascistic way to force people to not procreate. Now, that is not a slight kind of little allegation against her. There's a very serious allegation against Allegra Stratton. Now, if the smile she has been kind of photographed in is anything to go by, then she thinks that she's kind of has overcome that allegation. And she is enjoying this particular focus being given by The Guardian, which is where she worked before. This is something that she may not be kind of correct in celebrating yet. Now, this is the headline about the Cummings thing. And as I said, this is the line that The Guardian is copying. And it's at one with the other papers, The Guardian. And the Express is the only one that is running a story on the front page, the main story about Diana. And that's the fake TV evidence that this is the same line as Diana's brother, Charles Spencer. And there is a small one for the exit of Dominic Cummings. They are calling him exit for the man of Brexit. They're not calling Mr. Brexit. They're calling him man of Brexit. And they're saying that a little protocol would have saved Diana from the crash. That is based on the assumption that it was an accident. Muhammad Al-Fayed, Dodi Fayed's father, Dodi also was killed, maintains that it was a conspiracy and it was a murder. But there has been no kind of reporting of Al-Fayed's opinions for a long time by Fleet Street. And the Daily Star is the one that is saying to Cummings the words that are going to be very popular with a lot of people who oppose Brexit. And it's saying that get your cardboard box and sod off. And it says the first line by Steve Hughes is Dominic Cummings, the weirdo blamed for destroying lockdown, walks out of number 10 with a cardboard box of belongings last night after he was finally forced out of his job as PM Boris Johnson's senior advisor. It was long overdue. So they're saying that it is long overdue, but obviously they're not saying about in that kind of piece on the front page. They're not saying anything about Brexit, but that is what it is. And on page 4, they're saying, the Daily Star, it's a pun on the phrase done and dusted. It's a done and dusted. Finally back in his box as Cummings leaves job at number 10. Now, this is not something that they would have said had they not been fully convinced of the strength of feeling among the establishment that the Brexit thing is no longer essential. That is what it is. And there is a thing on the Star saying in the editorial, so-called, and they're focusing on his breaking of the lockdown rules. They're not mentioning which is the main reason. They're not mentioning the reason. So they're lying as well. Their headline is Sight for Sore Eyes. It says that it seems a while ago, but it's actually just 6 months since Dominic Cummings almost caused a constitutional crisis just to keep his job. His blatant breaking of the lockdown rules that he helped create totally undermined the government and its plans for beating COVID-19. And it goes on like that. And then there is a picture, kind of a montage on the same page. It says Dominic Cummings is now looking for a job. Now they're painting him as a person out of a job. Now, obviously, he's not out of it. He's a multimillionaire. And he's been involved with giving jobs. And with those jobs and contracts worth hundreds of millions of public money to companies and outfits he's been involved with. So he's a multimillionaire already. So money is not going to be short. And that says that, the police is saying that the job center is that way. That's a completely kind of inappropriate, that is to say, irrelevant and not factually sustainable kind of thing. And it doesn't apply to Dominic Cummings. And the Daily Mirror is running the photos of the victims of the Yorkshire Ripper who has died. And let's see what the Mirror is saying. The Mirror is not going to say anything that is truthful. It's saying that the Yorkshire Ripper was evil to the end. And they've got pages of copy on the Yorkshire Ripper. And they're talking about, in the editorial, they're talking about Dominic Cummings out at last, but they're not talking about the Brexit reason. And I got on page 16 and 17, the sorry sight, lockdown chief cheetah is off. They're not talking about the Brexit liar is off or the leave liar is off. They're talking about lockdown. And so therefore these papers are covering up for Brexit, the Brexiteers. And the Daily Mail is talking about saving Christmas, saying that talking about one minister who is supposedly, who has said, we will show we care this Christmas. That's the resolve of the man in charge of, or in the name of, health, Matt Hancock. And let's see what. And they're talking about the Yorkshire Ripper and telling him to rot in jail, in hell. And they're saying that the cost of £10 million it cost to keep him there with all the stuff that he was given. And there is a piece about the post office and the scandal of postmasters and postmistresses wrongly kind of accused of lying and deception. And some of them were jailed and some of them were even kind of led to their deaths. That's what the Daily Mail says. So these are the people who lied about the postmasters and mistresses are going to be prosecuted for perjury. So the question is, why is it taking that long? And why were so many people, innocent people, victimized? Why were they victimized? Why wasn't there any recognition of the consistent innocence of these people? Why wasn't it recognized? Because the system in this country, in England, in Britain, there is no system for stopping big crimes by people in government posts or kind of posts in government agencies. And there is this 2-page spread about the elderly victims of COVID prevented from seeing one another, or the relations of the victims of COVID prevented from seeing and meeting them. And Stephen Glover, who is a Daily Mail kind of writer, he writes, he's a kind of jobbing columnist. He is behind, currently in the current regime of the Daily Mail, he is a man whose name appears behind a number of big kind of issue columns. So he's saying, I'm glad he's gone, that is Cummings. At last, Boris can be his own man. So what they're doing, they're saying that Boris Johnson was a victim of Dominic Cummings. And they will next say that Boris Johnson was all along for staying in the EU. It was distorted, twisted minds like Dominic Cummings that manipulated Boris Johnson into accepting that Brexit needed to be done. And the Daily Mail is celebrating this other story. Picture of Cummings leaving number 10 Downing Street, the cardboard box. And the Daily Mail says Cummings gets going as the PM takes back control, as if, again, that it was Cummings that prevented Johnson from taking control. And there is a piece, 2 pages, investigation so-called, by Neil Tweedy, which is headlined, Whacked by the number 10 Mafiosi. And they're saying that the mafia at number 10 Downing Street was embodied, personified by Cummings and Kane. And they've made infants out of the ministers. So this is all shocking. Yet they never ever gave the slightest indication that this could have been going on. And there is another piece by somebody called Patrick Jepson, equerry and private secretary to HRH, the Princess of Wales, 1988 to 1996. And he says, I was Diana's gatekeeper. How devious Bashir neutralized me was diabolical. So this is completely kind of shocking revelation. This is not shocking at all, because this is what goes on every day. And today, they are doing the same kind of diabolical lying and invention. And as I said, the claim by the BBC that they found that letter that Diana wrote after the interview suggests that they must have forged it in order to save themselves and Martin Bashir. Because if they say that Bashir was wrong and he lied, then the BBC would be admitting that it lied and it covered up for his lying. So they have to stop by any means that kind of situation being reached. And there is a piece about the COVID kind of isolation and its cruelty, inhumanity to the elderly. So it's an essay, Saturday essay by Tony Robinson. And he's saying that he thanks God that his parents are not alive, but he's standing shoulder to shoulder with the Daily Mail's campaign to stop this isolation and separation of the loved ones from the relations. And the Daily Mail is running the same editorial. It's like Boris Johnson has written the editorial, all the papers. And they're using the word reset everywhere. Then now that Cummings is gone, Johnson should reset or press the reset button. That is to say, assert his control and his authority. And there is a column by John Humphreys of the BBC Radio 4 Today program, talking why he has lost faith in our spiritual leaders, but he makes a case for one person who is an exception. And there is this piece about the murder of Annie, the wife of this man, what's his name? Shriyan Devani, the Indian, who is now making a lot of money from properties in the West Country in England. And they've got a piece, of course, that very much suits the Daily Mail, denial of the treaty obligations, is saying that Rishi Sunak is in a bid to curb the foreign aid budget, which is part of the agenda. As we have said, foreign aid budget is not. And this is the actual kind of type of thing that Boris Johnson and Cummings and whoever have been doing. It says that this piece in the Daily Mail today, pages 40 and 41, is devastating expose of how ministers have scorned some of Britain's top virus experts, hired novices instead, and blown billions in the process. And the headline is Operation Shambles. Now, think about this. Billions. They're talking about the Johnson cabal spending billions. Now, who have they spent it on, or who have they given it to? These are the kind of questions that need to be asked and answered. Because the same government has refused to pay the free school meals to the children, poor children, and is still refusing to help most of the low-income people and people in poverty at every level through every kind of excuse. And yet, this same government is spending billions, hundreds of billions of pounds. Who are they giving it to? Because they must be giving it to somebody, because the people who need the money are not getting the money. And that's the question that the Daily Mail is not asking. That's where the Daily Mail is covering up again. And the I newspaper is repeating the lie in the I style. It is saying the Prime Minister's team torn apart by feud. That is not the truth. The feud has been dressed up, designed, and made to look like the feud that has decisively forced Cummings out of the thing. That's not the case. It's the American president is coming. That is the message that has got to Johnson, and he knows that he cannot deal with that with the Brexiteers in place and with the Brexit agenda. And the Financial Times, which is, of course, it carries this how to spend it. And it says comfort and joy. And it's doing the holiday issue. And the comfort and joy photograph, the lead photograph on the cover, is probably that of what the Guardian calls, one word, but we'll call the mixed race female. The Guardian calls them mulattoes. The Guardian celebrated what it calls the mulattoes are coming. That is to say, mixed race, that is European and African mixed race kind of persons who are going to take over control in various kind of positions of power in Britain. That is what the Guardian said about 10, 12 years ago. And this has been continuing because that's what they do. They promote the mixed race of that kind of ethnic kind of mixture persons ahead of anybody else. That is part of the agenda. It's not the part of the agenda to create an anti-racist balance, but it's part of the agenda to create a pro-racist justification and exhibition and display. And here on the FT weekend, they're saying that Johnson cuts Cummings loose. And the Financial Times is repeating the same lie, that it's the kind of feud or whatever that caused the exit. It's not the feud at all. It's what the Financial Times comments writer Philip Stevens said yesterday. And they're promoting the Pfizer kind of vaccine. And they're celebrating it as a game changer for the world global stocks. This is all about money, making money with the Pfizer kind of alleged historic kind of vaccine. And even the Financial Times has got somebody called Camilla Cavendish, all kind of coming on board as a result of the US presidency election. And there is the main editorial is to tackle mental illness epidemic. And the Financial Times is again repeating the feud at number 10 Downing Street. And it's in denial about the impact of the US presidential election result. That's what we maintain is the reason. And the Boris Graph says that's the only paper that is actually saying this, which is quite interesting, is that the Cummings exits number 10 with parting shot at Prime Minister. Chief aide accuses Johnson of dithering as he is ordered out of Downing Street. Now that is absolutely what we have said all along, that Boris Johnson is unfit and is not as competent as he could be, nowhere near as competent. And it says that it says on page 20 that Trump finally admits to uncertainty about remaining as US leader. Well, he's kind of backtracking in a way that suits the propaganda cycles. And the Boris Graf says that the BBC finds Diana letter that clears Bashir. Exactly. It is in order to clear the BBC that the BBC had to find that letter. And that is what I said, and that is what is going to happen. And there are pages on how will King Boris rebuild his court. That's the Boris Graph making him the monarch. And they've got the faces of George Osborne, Sajid Javid, Jeremy Hunt, Kerry Simmons, Munira Mirza, and Allegra Stratton. These are the people that the Telegraph is parading as the courtiers of the new king, Johnson. Let's put it this way. They have been relentlessly promoting Boris Johnson for decades. And Boris Johnson has completely kind of exposed his weaknesses and unfitness and his dishonesty. So there is not this kind of celebration of reset and King Boris or King Johnson. This is not going to last. And not because the policy line is going to be changed, but because the inherent weakness in the character of Boris Johnson will give way, and he will not be able to kind of deliver whatever remains to be delivered. And Brexit is done for because the economy and other factors are going to prevail. And the economy is not going to benefit from the degeneration or additional degeneration of Brexit. And the fact that there is a still unresolved virus crisis makes things only worse. Essentially, Fleet Street is lying today as it lies every day. As I said, with the exception of the piece by Philip Stevens on Friday's Financial Times, the Financial Times today is lying. The other issues that it is writing editorially about, they are not original pieces, original comments. They are kind of jobbing journalism that the Financial Times is doing, like climate change and all the rest of it. Because the climate emergency has been there it is getting worse for 100 years. And the Financial Times has not done anything like 1/1000th of a 1% of attention that crisis has kind of deserved and does deserve. So what they're doing now is because they're celebrating or they're kind of expressing a kind of collective sigh of relief at the end of the Trump kind of presence in the White House. Because Trump is conceding, because the evidence is overwhelming. So Trump cannot kind of keep saying that he will challenge the result because the evidence is against him. And as you said yesterday, I mean, how could the congressional results be accepted and the kind of Senate elections votes counted and not kind of condemned for being rigged? It's in the same ballot. So it is absolutely stupid, and they're not even mentioning this. Even now, they're not mentioning it. But we are saying it. We have to kind of assert that. If anyone else is saying it, welcome to the minority kind of platform in terms of the number of people that they don't see the truth. So we are saying the truth all along, and we've been striving to tell the truth all along. And in terms of the rest of the coverage in the papers, there is nothing about the economy, there is nothing about the society, there is nothing about the poverty, and there is nothing about accountability. And there is a piece about, well, there are quite detailed copies on the Fleet Street papers about the Yorkshire police apologizing to the families of the victims. Well, the question is, how long did he carry on, the crimes, and what was wrong with the policing? Why did it take so long? That question has to be answered, and that has to be investigated. It's not a political question as to the policing, because we have no agenda in raising a political question about the policing. we have a deeper agenda as to the acceptability, the viability, the fitness of the policing for society. Is the police, either in Yorkshire or anywhere else in England, fit for purpose? And if it is not, why is it not? Because the police are very well paid. So it's not the lack of resources. And as yesterday's headlines said, I mean, the Metropolitan Police's current kind of top person, Cressida Dick, reportedly said that she would kind of make the Metropolitan Police anti-racist, and she would increase the number of what she calls BAME. I mean, what she means is African and Asian people, or people of African and Asian backgrounds, would be increased. But whatever her target won't come anywhere near the numbers that there should be in terms of the numbers of people, African and Asian people in London. I mean, it would be very small indeed what she is doing. And it is similar to the kind of gesture that the UK makes about aid to poorer countries. I mean, Rishi Sunak, the finance minister, is playing a right-wing card because that is popular with the right wing of the Conservative Party. Anything racist, anything to cut aid to the poor people or poor countries is a good item for the careers opportunities. Just like any racist agenda that Boris Johnson actually pursued, he knew would suit his purpose of getting elected by the Conservatives and then hopefully conning the people by saying Brexit, let's get Brexit done, into getting a majority, which he did. And all of those were facilitated by the garden gnome role played by Jeremy Corbyn, still in post as the leader or the fronter of the Labour Party in Parliament. And Corbyn is, of course, losing in terms of the battle in the bureaucratic struggle that is going on within the Labour Party, because the report says that the NEC majority was lost. The Times says today that the momentum failed to kind of control the NEC numbers. And we have been saying that momentum is an overrated, kind of exaggerated, completely bogus left outfit. It is completely corrupt and dishonestly operated by or fronted by John Lansman. And Lansman has actually sabotaged by kind of overhyped momentum. He sabotaged the Labour Party at every stage. And Lansman was a Brexiteer, as was Unite's Len McCluskey, as was Corbyn himself. So these Brexiteers sank the Labour Party. And the so-called anti-Brexiteer, Keir Starmer, did not argue anywhere near coherently as the evidence supported any coherent argument to be made. And he didn't make the argument against the Brexit and the peril that Brexit carried with it. The peril that the American president, newly elected president, Joe Biden, has captured in a very short kind of comment. He has said that the Good Friday Agreement must stand, must carry on, must be upheld and respected. So going back to the question of the COVID-19 and the mess and the 40, 50, 60 billion pounds being pocketed by the conservatives. That's what has been going on. Because one of the things that Cummings has been caught doing is that big contracts have been given to people he's connected with, people he's related to. How is it that billions of pounds are being looted, robbed from the public, and Starmer has not made anything of it? It's not just that Starmer is letting the conservatives get away with looting, but it's also the question, more importantly, if and when, if he gets in as the government or the fronter of the government, will Starmer be able to deliver what the Tories have been taking away, robbing and looting? Will he be able to deliver the restoration of all the rights of the people that the Tories are looting and taking away? This is a question that is similar to the question that the media, Fleet Street, never ask. Nor do the so-called local versions of the so-called official kind of newspaper, the press, ask about the local councils. So the local councils, for example, in Tower Hamlets, there is this tendency that, there are two reports floating in the last 2 days. One has been promoted by the Guardian's Dave Hill. Now, Dave Hill was the Guardian's London blogger. Throughout the whole period that Luther Roman was in post as the so-called elected mayor at the expense of Tower Hamlets. So if it is 6 calendar years, then for 6 calendar years, Dave Hill never once published a single paragraph of genuine, evidential, fact-based criticism of the mayor system, let alone of the corruption and the abuse that were taking place with Luther Rahman in place as the so-called elected mayor. So this man has no record of opposing corruption, demanding accountability. And when Ruxana Fiaz in next door Newham was about to be kind of selected by the Newham Labour Party formally to be the Labour Party's candidate for mayor at the May 2018 election, Dave Hill gave a kind of, how shall I say it? It's a completely unjustifiable plug for Roxana Fiaz, as did Paul Waugh of the Politics Whatever website. And it seems that these people are mainstream because Paul Waugh is mainstream. The Politics website, although it's not a newspaper title, but it's actually Politics Home, that he's actually, or whatever it is called, or he's maybe Paul Waugh, maybe with the Huffington Post. I may be confusing Paul Waugh with another one. Who runs the Politics Home kind of website. Whether they are running newspaper kind of websites or whether they're running just a website. These are often in communication with the mainstream newspapers and the broadcasters, and they imitate one another and share the same line or lines among themselves. So they're part of the mainstream in that sense. And they're doing business just like the mainstream newspapers and television companies are. Our campaign is completely not for profit. Qualitatively, we are contributing very high levels of contributions, authentic originality, but we are not doing this for money. We are not asking for money for anyone who is watching this directly or indirectly. So these people have been parading the mayor post or the mayor post holder, and they're not accounting for the failures of these posts and post holders. And the prosecution or the petition against Lutfur Rahman that was filed in June 2014 by 4 persons, that was not done as a result of these kind of bloggers or newspapers, local papers, doing anything about it. It was the personal decision of the 4 persons that did the actual formality. So if you take aside that particular petition, there has been no challenge to the 4 councils mayors, that is Lewishams, Steve Bullock, until last election, I think, Steve Bullock, and Newham's longest serving one, Robin Wales, and Hackney and Tower Hamlets. There is no accountability from any of these mayors. And none of the papers, none of the broadcasting outlets has been asking for accountability. And none of the papers or the commentators or the bloggers has been pointing out the local robbery, the robbery of the local people's rights that the local councils are being able to kind of commit and perpetrate against the local people under the cover of the mayor. Why is it being perpetrated so? Because when there is a mayor, elected mayor or executive mayor, that automatically means that the councillors who are elected to form the council in numbers lose their say on decisions that are made in the name of the council. They become the personal dictatorial preserve of the mayor. Which is why Lutfur was able to abuse Tower Hamlets Council and still remain beyond being held to account for the money that he abused and the powers that he abused. So there is a saying in the blog that Dave Hill runs. He doesn't mention the local people. He doesn't mention the electors. He doesn't mention the corruption that went on. He doesn't mention any of the findings by the auditors or by the Secretary of State or the investigators for the Panorama program or by Channel 4, because Channel 4 did several items about Lutfur Rahman. And the BBC, even the BBC did some. But the BBC obviously was less rigorous. But putting all the evidence together, Lutfur Rahman did severe abuse, serious abuse of money and his post. And none of the bloggers, none of the papers has, to this day, listed them, let alone admitted them. And we shall be examining in detail again by way of updating contextually and topically the contents concerned of the ruling by Richard Morey, published on the 23rd of April 2015. We shall be doing that in the next editions.